Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck. You bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And as a reminder, as we do every week on this program, when we say go green, we don't mean mere environmentalism. We're talking about deep ecological connection. And whether you come at that from an eco-spiritual feminist perspective, or you come at it from a hard science analytical perspective, or like me, you say those are both completely valid ways of understanding the world and they're both accurate and truthful, I'm here to tell you this. Whatever we do to this interconnected web of life, we are ultimately doing to ourselves. And y'all, we got some truth telling to do. We are doing it wrong. We are literally destroying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. And we are going to have to transition into a new political economy, return to the balance that existed before the enclosure movement, before empire. But don't fret, we know how to do it. We've done it before. And I am really excited. Normally, I'd be bringing on co-host Shane Knight. Shane, if you're watching, howdy. I know Shane is actually in Montreal with Rick Wolf at the moment, so he's not going to join us. Then the other thing we'd do is play the democracy tracker put together by our good friends over at the Democracy Collaborative and really put together by Mel Figueroa. But guess what, y'all? We got Mel Figueroa on as a guest tonight, and we're going to do the Democracy Tracker live. Mel Figueroa, how you doing, lady?
Good to see you, David. Hello to the viewers here, and it's great to be here live.
So, Mel, look at here. We're going to talk about fascism, as you and I sometimes joke. We need to get comfortable saying the F word. So that's the subject of the show, but let's do something fun. Let's do a live Democracy Tracker. Because as I often say on this show, I love the tagline, y'all read the news so we don't have to. So I know there's about 4 or 5 things that in the Democracy Tracker you've really lifted up. Let's start with Gaza and Palestine. Hit it.
Yeah, so the situation in Gaza and Palestine has really hit a critical point. The IPC, which is the World Hunger Scale, says that up to 80% of the Palestinian people are now entering phase 5 of a starvation crisis. Over 100 people have died of starvation in this month. And on top of that, Israel has been enforcing an aid blockade, and the aid that has gotten in, they have been shooting at people who are coming for the aid, and over 1,000 people actually have been killed since May. But it's gotten to a point where, like, the global, powers that be that have kind of stood by and watched this happen, not just since October 7th, but for literally the last 75 years, are actually taking notice. So over 100 aid organizations warned that the mass starvation crisis is becoming critical. 25 Western nations, including the UK, France, and Canada, denounced the denounced the inhumane killings of Palestinians and condemned the Israeli government and called for them to end the war. And also last week, France actually was the first Western nation to recognize Palestinian statehood. So that's a huge thing. That is a huge, huge thing after so many decades of, the Palestinians being, not just treated as second-class citizens, but literally dying live streamed, right? I mean, like the Holocaust, you could get away with saying, oh, I didn't know, but now everybody knows. And so it's really hitting a critical point. And so this is, it's definitely a thing to watch. I know a lot of folks who care about Palestine have been watching for a long time, but now, it's really getting to a point where the world has to stand up and do something.
The next one, I do want to really underscore this genocide, this starvation is not just happening. The Israeli government are making conscious, intentional, and deliberate decisions to commit a genocide, to force mass starvation, and are murdering people who are queuing up trying to receive aid. So this really needs to be said. There is no defense at this point. Like, it must be stopped.
Yeah, and if we're going to be talking about fascism today, you know, again, there's a genocide has literally been happening under that we've been seeing, literally almost live streamed. And so, one things we'll be talking about is like, how much tolerance do people really have for this?
Speaking of tolerance, that's the international crisis and genocide that the US government has been allowing and not stopping. But there's two things in one in this week's Democracy Tracker. I want you to touch on both the Labor Department and the Department of Education. So I'm going to give you a chance to talk about both of those at once.
Okay, great. So last week, the U.S. Department of Labor announced the plan to rewrite or repeal more than 60 what they call obsolete workplace regulations, as part of Trump's a plan and promise and literally executive order to deregulate as much as possible. But some of the things that are actually being, considered on the chopping block are things like minimum wage standards for home care workers. So, that's not just, somebody's relative, and even if it is somebody's relative, they're taking care of a disabled person, they're taking care of elders. And so they're literally saying that these people can, like, you don't have to pay them minimum wage, you can just pay them as low as you want. The other thing that they're doing is also repealing a Biden era rule that ended the practice of paying sub-minimum wage to disabled employees. So I don't know if people really know, but disabled people, like, autistic folks and people with Down syndrome and stuff, there's actually work camps for them where they get paid as little as 25 cents an hour. And that was allowed until like 4 or 5 years ago. And so the Trump administration is basically saying, yeah, you can, throw disabled people into work camps and pay them peanuts now. The other things that are happening is they're also repealing a lot of OSHA rules. So things like worker safety, especially at a time when, like, there's a huge heat wave. Thankfully, not here in California for once, right? But they're repealing the liability of employers if workers are subjected to dangerous conditions. They're also repealing mine safety rules so that black lung is going to be a thing again, everybody, just like measles, right? And so yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's happening now for American workers that is going to be just really bad. And again, this is part of the Trump administration's push to be as friendly to corporations as possible. And again, let's make it the Gilded Age again. we're gonna all be living in a Dickens novel soon, I suppose. And then the other thing on the Department of Education is that well, there's a couple of things. So as we know, the Department of Education is being gutted right now by Linda McMahon. So about half of the workforce is already gone. And they're going to do things like transfer administration of student loans to, like, the Small Business Administration. They're trying to farm out all of the functions that the Department of Education had, which is, well, they're going to throw out all the things like, data and research on, like, what's good for kids, right? But they're going to keep student loans, of course, because we're going to be stuck with that forever. And they're farming it out to other organizations. And this really is part of trying to dismantle. So they can't abolish it outright. The Trump administration cannot do that. That takes an act of Congress, because it took an act of Congress to create the Department of Education. But what they're going to try to do is basically, like, hollow it out as much as possible. That said, the stuff on Columbia University. So Columbia University also let's just say, rolled over and capitulated to the Trump administration, agreeing to pay them $220 million to get $400 million back. But not just that. They are, even though they're saying, oh, we're going to keep academic freedom, they have to submit data on admissions, including people's race, people's income level, and people's test scores to the federal government, to the Trump administration, who's going to monitor that just to make sure they're not being woke and DEI. So this is what the American Association of University Professors said. This was an unprecedented disaster for higher education, because it puts, it basically puts the big daddy nanny, I don't know, over an elite university, to say, we can monitor who you let in. We can tell you what to ask international students, before you let them in. All of these things is really, a disaster for, for higher education, which is supposed to have freedom, supposed to have opportunity for people to learn things. I would not have gone to college. I wouldn't have, known the things I know right now if it wasn't for, an inclusive environment in the university. And that's gone now.
Mel, you and I have talked about this, like, as a, not just a working class kid, but a kid out of rural poverty. The reality is, without a Pell Grant, I probably could not have gone to college. I do want to, before we go to the next thing, we were talking about Gaza. Michael Nugent, a longtime listener and viewer who says, it is important to understand that genocide is a strategy of war, and that contrary to some narratives, there's been a protracted resistance being led by a multi-faction joint resistance, and the fact that different factions have come together to resist bodes well for a Palestine national project. Michael, I completely agree with you. It has been long overdue to have the global community condemn the Israeli genocide, but I agree with you. To me, Palestine, not just Gaza, but Palestine itself, is the canary in the proverbial coal mine. This is what imperialism in its end stage looks like. That's why we have to be clear, as horrific as it is, and it is horrific, it is symptomatic of the global ecological collapse, the end of late stage capitalism, the new era that's coming up. So yay that there is that resistance. Mel, there's also an executive order, though, coming out of the Trump administration. I want you to tell folks about that one.
So I'm going to pull it up real quick because yeah, so he just signed another, that this isn't in the tracker. It's going to be in the tracker next week. Hold on. I should have pulled this up before. But he signed an executive order basically saying ending crime and disorder on America's streets. But basically, it gives localities and states the right to just remove homeless people and put them in camps. Basically, literally, basically saying, we're not going to mess with this like housing first anymore. We're not going to, kind of mess with whatever it is. Like, you can just keep sweeping them and put them in institutions where possible. So again, we're going to be talking about fascism today. What is being done to the houseless people as a part of this executive order, again, just also like the Palestinians, is something that we really have to look at in terms of how much are we going to tolerate that, what is being done to human beings. And this is on our streets, in cities all across America.
And, so everything is bad. But there is in the tracker a bit of good news. Mel, we could use a little good news. Bring it to us. What's happening?
Well, a couple of good things. So again, number one, just like Michael said, the resistance to the Israeli genocide in Gaza is also reaching a turning point. The fact that we have, actual like countries officially now denouncing the genocide, we have like world leaders actually saying the word. I mean, it's crazy that like we're just kind of hanging on to these little bits, but I think that's really a turning point. Another thing is this new party in the UK that has been created by brand new party by Jeremy Corbyn and Labour MP Zura Sultana. And it is the formation of a new left-wing party, which is a explicitly socialist response to Labor's failure to deliver transformative change. So they literally just created it or announced it about 72 hours ago. And as of right now, there are more than 450,000 people who have signed up to support the new party, overwhelmingly young people. So this is amazing because, this really is, it bodes well for our chances, because as we'll talk about, part of why fascism is coming is because we've been trapped, and so this is a way out.
And I do want to really underscore something. Neither you or I are electoral fetishists. We don't think that elections are the end all be all, but it is a tactic that should be used. What I think is really interesting about what Sultana and Corbyn are doing in the UK is to embrace an unapologetically, explicitly socialist response to the failure of the neoliberals in response to fascism, and 450,000 in roughly 72 hours. I'm going to tell you, I think the people are way ahead of the pundits, way ahead of the so-called social movement left, especially in the US, who are chasing after and tailing working families and other Democratic Party front groups. I'm telling you, the people are ready, Mel. That's my assessment.
Absolutely. And if you see the success of Zohran Mamdani in New York City, who did run as a Democrat, but he did say the S word. He was a democratic socialist and won the primary, especially among young people. This is the whole thing, right? I mean, again, when was the Cold War? The Cold War ended, oh my God, 34 years ago now. Oh my God. And so, people who are 18 to 24, even up to 30 years old, like, don't even remember why socialist is a bad word. This is a really good thing, right? And so, yeah, I think this is going to bode well.
So I got to say, Greg Dunn, I loved it. We saw it on the screen. Y'all put it back up because I just thought that was hilarious. Greg Dunn writes in, this is the type of British invasion that I could get behind. Bring back the Beatles and the new party. Right on,
There
Greg.
we
I'm with
go.
it. I'm with it. Looky
Right
here,
on,
Mel.
Greg.
We got a lot to talk about, though, about fascism. So,
Yes.
like, and I don't want to embarrass you, Mel Figueroa, but the reality is back in 2016, you were the first one, at least for me, who had the clarity about what Charlottesville represented. You were literally on the front line at the Battle of Berkeley as a professor who was teaching at the University of California at Berkeley. You reintroduced me to Gramsci. Like, again, I give you credit all the time. I've got a lot of mentors. You are one of them. So I'm going to ask you, Mel Figueroa, break it down without dumbing it down. When people talk about fascism, what does that mean?
Oh, well, in a nutshell, right? Fascism. So there's, again, as I said before, uh, you know, if people are trying to look for 1930s Germany, for the real to suddenly turn black and white, and then people starting screaming in German, that's not going to happen because it's not 1939 and it's not Germany. And guess what? Germany wasn't even the only fascism that was around in the 1930s, right? But there are certain characteristics of fascism as a social phenomenon that happened in the 30s, and as you and I both know, has been trying to come up at different times since then, and then now has had a big resurgence. So why now, right? So there are a couple of things that we can look at. first of all, fascism is a phenomenon that occurs when capitalism specifically is in crisis, when you have huge levels of inequality, when you have people whose standard of living has fallen, right? In Germany, it was the hyperinflation crisis after World War One. Now it's gestures wildly at everything, right? Neoliberalism, really, more generally, and and so, again, this is not just authoritarianism. This is not like, ooh, my fascist dad, right? It's not really an attitude. It is an actual theory of organizing society. So when the political economic system is in crisis, right, you're going to have different suggestions, right, of what to do about it, right? So here we have Corbyn and a socialist response, which is fantastic, and a lot of people are jumping to that, and it's really the first time it's actually been allowed to be proposed, and that's also a really important thing, because the other thing that happens when capitalism is in crisis is that you have roughly not two but three divisions of society. You have the right wing, right, which responds to a crisis in capitalism by, wanting to go back to the old days, right? When certain people weren't allowed on the golf course and women were in the kitchen, right? So you have the right wing response. You have the centrist response, which is really important here because it's what Gramsci called passive revolution. So again, people are in a capitalist crisis are broke, scared, and angry. And when people are broke, scared, and angry, they are looking for anything, right? Anything that is something different than the status quo that is grinding them down, right? So you have the centrist party, or they have the centrist kind of faction of society, right? The right wing has a comprehensive worldview, right? It's a monstrous one, but it is something that can be offered to people. The centrists don't really have one. They just have the status quo, right? And so, but you have this other kind of upsurge coming up from the left. We can see that in Bernie Sanders, Zohran Mamdani, and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and also other things. But what the centrists really do here is that because they are so kind of self-interested, they actually block the left. They block their challengers from the left, and they don't actually do that much to the right. So in blocking the other alternative, they allow the right-wing monstrous fascist alternative to become popular. And that's exactly what's happened here. Of course, in the 21st century, we have another dimension to it, which is technology, right? You have, again, Elon Musk's Hitler bot on what used to be Twitter, and I'll still call it Twitter because I ain't gonna call it X ever. And so you have Cambridge Analytica. There's actually some really good like investigative stories on Wired and ProPublica that really shows how the fascist right, which is bankrolled by a lot of tech oligarchs, and let's name them, right? Peter Thiel, right? Curtis Yarvin, right? A lot of these folks are actually bankrolling, right, the push to move that Overton window so far to the right that fascism becomes an option. So that's like one. So if we think about this in terms of crisis, right, this is also really important as well, because when brutal people start doing brutal things, right, the minimum fascism requires is for good people to do nothing, right? This is where kind of like that's kind of where the fascist dad comes in, I guess. So like, when the abuser starts abusing the kids or the people, right, you have, folks that stand by, they don't like it, but they're not doing anything to actually stop it. And that's what allows these folks, because fascism is very opportunistic, to take every single thing they can and push it as far as they can. And you're seeing this happen with the Trump administration right now, right? Eroding the rule of law. I mean, is the rule of law even a thing anymore, right? Eroding institutions, literally decimating the federal government structure and civil service. So, all of these things, I mean, they are revolutionaries in a sense that they want to upend the order. How they're upending the order is not exactly something we want. It's not something I want, right? And it's not something you want.
That I want
Yeah,
you to
I'll stop
react
there.
to, and then I'm going to react to it. But I want
Hmm.
to invite you to do it first. It
Hmm.
goes like this. A comrade observed that it's important to understand what it means that Trump is a fascist, but the state is not yet fascist. What do y'all think? Mel, I'm
Yeah,
going to get you to go first.
because fascism is not, and like, there's no road sign you're like, you are now entering fascism. You can have people with fascist ideologies, and Donald Trump certainly has some, but he is more of an autocrat. He's more about Trump. If it's fascist, call it King Trump, whatever, right? Because look, even the actual like ideological fascist parties in Europe don't want to mess with him because they're just like, whoa, you know. So like Trump himself is kind of more about Trump, right? But the people around him, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, Peter Thiel, again, all of these folks, Elon Musk with his, let's talk about that, right? Um, are certainly people who have studied, and this is the thing, right? Just like us on the socialist left have a tradition, right? We study things, we study theory. We're going to talk about theory today, but and so do the fascists. And so some of these people are actual ideological fascists, but again, it's a social phenomenon, and it is in the process right now, which means we can do something about it. We're in something called what Gramsci called a conjuncture. And when a conjuncture happens, it's kind of when stuff breaks and then there's like kind of an opening. And so right now, everything's kind of in the mix and contested, right? And when things contest it, that means the right is going to step up and do something, which means we have to step up and do something too. This is the time for action. No more talk. This is what I've been saying, and I've been saying this for a while. Talk is cheap. This is not the time right now to perfect your theory. This is the time to put it into practice. This is the time now to try to put our thumbs on the scale, really, and push the wheel of history in a way we want. Because if we don't, right? And again, we don't have to support it. All we have to do is do nothing, and they're going to roll right over us.
So much, Mel, and completely agree. I think it's important to understand Trump is a grifter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how I think about it. I don't think he is an ideological fascist.
Mm-mm.
I think he's a narcissistic, mentally ill grifter, and he falls in and out. Like he'll say or do whatever it takes in order to continue to enrich himself and his immediate family. He has no allegiance to anything that we would understand as philosophy or ideology or morals or ethics. The horror of what fascism represents is in fact horrific, but it has an intellectual integrity. And here is how fascism really operates. As Mel says, fascism emerges when capitalism is in crisis, when the state is failing. And fascism says, as an ideology, we understand and we have a plan for it. The problem is the other, and the other are always immigrants or whoever the minorities or ethnic and national minorities, whatever it is. Now, in the US, fascism is always white supremacist. It's always Christo-fascism. It's always anti-black and brown. But there are black and brown skinned fascists in India, in Brazil, in Africa right now, because the other there is something else, some other tribal or ethnic difference, right? The point is, it is a level of otherism, scapegoating gone amok to say they're the problem, and the solution is to eliminate the other and to return to whatever that sort of state of being was, which is interesting. Steve Miller, Bannon, we can go down the list. There are plenty of fascists who really understand that around Trump. I don't think that Trump is ideologically committed to that. I absolutely believe, however, that they have not yet taken complete control of the state apparatus. And that's why it is critical to resist, to block, to fight. That at the end of the day, merely waiting till November of 2026 to, quote, vote Trump and MAGA out of office is a profound mistake. Mel, how am I doing so far?
Absolutely. No, that's exactly the point. And actually something that you said kind of, brought something up too, which is, yes, there are Black and brown fascists in, different parts of the world, like Modi and the Hindutva party and all of that. But what's really important also to understand about fascism is its historical specificity and where it comes from. And again, Robin D.G. Kelly had a great article on Truth Out this week about, really going back to like, what is the thing that the core thing that the virus, shall we say, like that cell that comes up like a cancer every now and then whenever capitalism in crisis. That's because, we have to remember that capitalism came up only 500 years ago. We have had markets, we have had commerce for thousands of years, but capitalism as a specific method of wealth accumulation is only 500 years old. And why is that? That is because in 1492, right, Europeans came to this continent, Turtle Island, right? And the unfortunate, kind of confluence, right, of novel diseases that wiped out a whole lot of the indigenous population and active genocide, right? That was the first time in history, really, that the notion of an empty land that is there for us, God gave it to us, manifest destiny, all of that stuff, that had never happened before in history, right? And that was that very specific historical thing. So settler colonialism, right? The idea that Israel's trying to do right now, that you can just empty out, right? And this is where my geographer brain comes in, right? You can just empty out a homeland of people, right? And just go right in to dehumanize people, right? That's the other thing that is also characteristic of these 500 years in which fascism is now the endpoint, right? Which is also slavery, right? So slavery also has existed for thousands of years, but chattel slavery in particular, right? Where people who were kidnapped from Africa to do labor for American capitalists were not considered human beings. And the whole race theory, eugenics, all of that stuff was constructed around taking other human beings and telling your own people and drawing that line and saying, these are humans worth, preserving and taking care of, and these are subhuman. These are people you can throw away, right? So that is a huge other part of it, right? Where, again, the Palestinian genocide has been happening for 600 days, almost 700 days in front of our faces. And yet there are people who still struggle with understanding that Palestinian children have the same value as any other children, right? Because of this division that has happened. And it goes deep, y'all. It goes deep within our brains, right? There are people who will look at somebody like me and think that I'm just a garbage person, I guess there's somebody in the comments that I never worked a hard day in my life. You don't know my life, but I'm a human being, right? But there are people who will look at me and not look at me as a human being, right? There are people, again, Trump's order on the homeless. They're like, you will see this right now. You could probably go down the street and find somebody who doesn't think a homeless person is a human being, right? And so that's the huge part of this, is that a society that throws people away, a society that can say us and not you immigrants, not you whatever, right, will always be susceptible to fascism. So the other thing that we have to do, y'all, is not just build a new economy, build a new society where the seeds of fascism can never take root again. And that means ending white supremacy. That means, ending inequality. All of these things, and this is why I concentrate on the kind of conditions and components that give rise to fascism as a phenomenon, because those are the root things that we have to address, right, in order for this not to happen again in another 50 years. I don't think we're going to have that. I mean, we got nuclear weapons and climate change now. Why do you think Trump is dismantling FEMA, that he's getting rid of all of the scientists? It's not that they don't think climate change is a thing. They do. They're just calling it, they're just looking at it and saying, hey, it's a low rent genocide, ready to go, right?
Important to recognize something here, y'all, and that is the neoliberal Democrats, the leadership of the entire Democratic Party, allowed this to happen. They, through the agreement that they made with capital itself and empire, they have facilitated this. And make no mistake, the leadership of the Democratic Party would rather consistently negotiate with and find an agreement with fascists, because at the end of the day, they serve capital and empire. And that's the reason why I absolutely believe that electoral politics should be engaged, but we should do it on our terms in order to build that world that Mel is describing. The idea that somehow, if Trump had just not gotten elected, this would have been avoided is a delusional understanding of the ecological collapse, the economic collapse, and the political collapse. So to me, I want to be very clear. Mel and I both 100% agree that there should be an electoral arm to the resistance to fascism. But if all you ever do is show up to vote every 2 or 4 years and think that you're preventing fascism, you do not understand what fascism is. You do not understand capitalism or white supremacy. And it is with that, Mel, that I'm going to use this opportunity to say, all right, you've laid out what fascism is. I think you've made a really profound case that fascism of the 30s versus the fascism of today. You've touched on techno-feudalism, but I want to say, with a hat tip to Vladimir Lenin, lady, what is to be done?
Well, just smash capitalism. That's all. No, there's a lot to be done. I do think that the fight within the Democratic Party is important, because there does need to be people up in the halls of power that can stop things. Like, they could have stopped the big beautiful bill. Chuck Schumer could have. He really could have, and he did not, right? One of the things I think why the leadership of the Democratic Party, again, is so reticent. There's that meme that said, Democrats against Zora Mamdani, and it was like a big T-Rex, right? And then Democrats against Trump is like Barney. One of the things is that I think one of the centrists, who again serve the status quo, they serve the corporate agenda, and they serve empire, right? Immigrants were a lot more immigrants were deported under the Democratic presidents than Trump. I hate that sign that says, if Trump wasn't here, we'd all be at brunch right now. Oh, so you were at brunch when people were taking immigrants, when people were bombing folks in Palestine, right? But but part of why they are so insidious is because they still think that the world as it is still exists, that you can just still play by the rules and think that that's going to work. And that's the thing about conjunctures, right? Is that when when a kind of rupture like this happens, there is no going back, right? Like what, 75,000 civil servants, like, we're just talking about the Department of Education. It's gone, y'all. Like a lot of things are just gone and in an instant. And so the rules aren't the old rules anymore. You can't call up your political consultant who lives in some weird gated community and, like pretend that the world is going to be like that anymore. It's just not going to be that way. Like I said, this is where everything changes. And you either and again, all these broke, scared, and angry people are looking for something different. So you have to come up with something different. And I do think that there's a lot of folks that are doing that in their in their in their communities, right? It's also, it's not just kind of like a personal thing, but you can, in an organized way, right? If you're talking with your community and you're talking about the issues that your community faces, and every community has something a little different, right? Like we're in California, we got to deal with fires, right? Texas got to deal with floods, right? But and that's why I think building that new system from the ground up is going to be necessary. And again, somebody's going to do it. If we don't, guess who will, right? So, so actually, do you have yours? Because I got mine. This is a toolkit for a municipalist organizing, and what that
So
means.
before you say anything about it, I want
Yeah.
to give it a proper introduction, y'all.
Yeah.
This is called Building Power in Place, a municipal organizing toolkit. It's put out by our good friends at the Solidarity Research Center. This is, I think, one of the most clear examples of how to build in place not only an anti-fascist response, but also to create the world. I'm going to quote Mel Figueroa: how to create a world where the seeds of fascism cannot take root. Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah. And so, again, building from the ground up is where we're going to have to go anyway. The economic crisis that is just now starting to unfold, that's a consequence of Trump's tariffs and the evisceration of the federal government. The international crisis that's about to happen with Russia, China, Iran, Israel, everything. There's all kinds of things that are breaking off right now. And I know it seems so overwhelming, but really the starting point is within our own communities. Because if we're going to build a new system from the ground up, it's up to us to have those conversations with the people that we live, work, and play with in our communities to say, okay, let's look at the problems. What can we actually do? And then how can we push first our local government, then maybe our county government, maybe our state government. There's a lot of states right now that are resisting the Trump administration's agenda, that are, that are sanctuary cities. Proud of our town, Eureka, that declared itself a sanctuary city for trans people, right? So there are things that we can do on that local level to think together, right? And that's really what it is. If we don't want if we don't want to live in the techno feudalist, dystopia, God, I was such a cyberpunk fan when I was growing up, and now I'm like, I'm living in it. It's so weird. But if we don't want that, then we have to start talking with each other about what we really can do, right? And what we need and how to fulfill those needs, and then push for policies, push for new structures of government and social relations that can help us fulfill those needs. Because right now, ain't nobody going to come for us now. When that next fire comes, or when that next flood comes, or when when your local hospital goes up because of the budget bill, when our elders get their social security checks cut, we're going to need to figure that out, and we're going to figure it out together. And get this, we're going to have to do that work of actually valuing everybody in our community. That means the homeless folks. That means the immigrants. Yeah, it does mean your asshole neighbor down the street. It does mean the person you think is weird lives, on the corner or something like that. You don't have to like them. They are part of your community, because we can't throw people away. And I think we can. We've done it for 200,000 years. That's why we're here as a species. And so this toolkit is a really good place to start, to kind of start that process of having those conversations, to organize and to say, look, we can solve our own problems with empathy and cooperation and a bigger picture of policy that can help folks. Common sense stuff, right? So that it's that is an alternative to just killing off a bunch of people. And what, I don't even know, right? Because here's the other thing about fascism, right? First of all, it's never succeeded. That's, every time it came up in the 30s. Yeah, it took a world war, but it's been defeated. You and I know from the Rock Against Racism, right? And the music scene got beat back then too. So fascism's never actually totally succeeded. Guess what? Genocide has never totally succeeded. And damn, are we glad for that, right?
I want to jump in here, Mel, because we're running out of time, but you made a comment that I really want to lift up, amplify, because you and I are both, as they say, of a generation, right? Like, we were both in the punk scene, and I was in Houston, Texas, and I was a promoter of a lot of shows. And you and I remember that there were skinheads, but they were anti-racist, anti-fascist skinheads.
Sure.
And then
shout out,
or to Mike Crenshaw and the Minneapolis Baldies and the Anti-Racist Action. I mean, like, we can go old school, right?
Alerta Network.
I think I'll have Mike Crenshaw on the show sometime. But I do want to say this. At those venues where, like, speed metal was played, where punk was played, when the fascists would come, and they did come, only one of two things happens. When I don't mean like your asshole uncle or neighbor. I mean an actual ideological fascist. When an ideological group of fascists come into a venue, either they drove you out or you drive them out. You do not negotiate with fascists. You do not agree to disagree. I mean, we see that there's a whole slew of people in the chat who are like hardcore libertarian and right wing, fine, whatever. They can be here. This is our show, not theirs. But I'm just saying, I'm not going to be ugly to them. They can be here. But a genuine fascist would want to kill Mel Figueroa because of what she looks like. The other thing is, a genuine fascist would want to kill David Cobb because I defend, stand with, and see Mel Figueroa's humanity. Make no mistake about it. Fascism is happening now. Donald Trump is a symptom of what we are describing. We are either going to have some version of eco-socialism or fascism. We are fast approaching that. Which side are we on? Mel, what do you think? Have I, as I lifted you up as my mentor, is that about right? Or do you think I'm overstepping the case?
Oh yeah, no, it's, that's the thing, right? I mean, all y'all with your guns out there, you're thinking, it's going to be like a movie apocalypse. Guess what? It's not going to be like that. You're already in it. We are already in it. That's why you're mad, right? You know, when it comes down to it, it's not going to be individuals with guns. And guess what? My parents, all right, my parents lived through World War II and the Japanese occupation. My dad is harder than you will ever be, right? But how did they get through it? They didn't get through it by like with canned food and guns. They got through it with community. I am here. I exist. I lived because my parents and their communities drew upon their ancestral traditions and stuck it out together. And that's what we can do now. And not only can we stick it out together, as Daruti says, because I forgot it the last time that I was on, I'm going to say it now. And that's how we can end this. And this is a quote from Buenaventura Durruti. He was a Union leader in the Spanish Civil War. My favorite quotes ever that I almost say it's like a prayer sometimes in these times. He said, "We are going to inherit the earth. There is not the slightest doubt about that. The bourgeoisie may blast and burn its own world before it finally leaves the stage of history. We are not afraid of ruins. We who plowed the prairies and built the cities can build again, only better next time. We carry a new world here in our hearts. That world is growing this minute. If you go to that tracker, I got that movement tracker. That's the thing that gives me life now, is seeing all of these people in their own communities, right? They're not waiting for, some consultant up in Washington, D.C. to do something. They are protecting their immigrant neighbors. They are, showing up to town halls and, putting their elected leaders to account. They are building mutual aid to help each other. That's what's going to get us through. I'll tell you that.
You've got me tearing up over here, Durruti. I had the great privilege of being in Barcelona, and
Jelly.
Durruti murals are all over that city. That quote is there, and there are also images of roses next to loaves of bread. Like, the reality is, y'all, we got this together. Many of you have been asking about the Municipalism Learning Series. Just go to municipalism.org. I promise I'm going to have Yvonne Yen Liu, who is the chief coordinator over at the Solidarity Research Center, who did this amazing book called Building Power in Place. We'll do a deep dive on that. It is so good, y'all.
It's so cool. Look at that.
Mel, I just want to say to you, both as a friend, a mentor, a comrade, thank you so much for coming on live today. I always learn so much from talking to you. And my wife and partner, Ruthie, often says, Mel can really just explain it. She breaks it down without dumbing it down. And you did it here today. I want to thank you again, Mel Figueroa. If you're not yet subscribed to trackingthecrisis.org, do that for yourself. I want to end it with this, y'all. Redneck Gone Green is getting larger, stronger, and better organized every day. If you are not yet subscribed to the Substack, Redneck Gone Green, please do so. When this shows up on YouTube, I want to remind you that our program is owned by us, but we are on the Democracy at Work platform. That's the reason we're getting literally thousands of views now. So shout out and appreciation to Professor Rick Wolf and the entire crew over at Democracy at Work. But you can also join us on Substack. You can join Redneck Gone Green there. I really want to encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe. This movement is growing. Thank you so much to you, the viewer, listener of Redneck Gone Green. Remember this, y'all. Can't stop, won't stop. We gonna win. Peace, y'all.